In this lesson, we're going to look at some international agreements of the 1920s. And while you're watching this video, you should ask yourself, do these seem to be making the world a safer place? Even before we start looking at these agreements, though, a question rises, and that's this question. If countries believed the League of Nations could keep the peace, why were they making agreements outside it? Let's have a look at the first of these agreements, and that's the Washington Conference of 1921 to 1922. As you remember, the United States was not a member of the League of Nations, and so actually this had to be agreement outside the League of Nations. Another example of how the USA not being a League member undermines or weakens the League of Nations. So it's an agreement, as I say, outside the League. As you can tell from the picture, it's an agreement about the size of navies. And the United States, Britain and Japan, they set the size of their navies at 5 to 5 to 3, that ratio. That meant that Britain and the United States could have navies of an equal size, whereas Japan could have a navy 3/5 the size of Britain and Japan, or 60% of the size of their navies. Now, in a way, this seems like a good thing. It's an agreement which is going to stop a potential arms race, as long as Japan, for example, is happy at having a smaller navy. But in another way, as we say, it weakens the League by having an agreement outside of the League of Nations. Let's look next at a treaty called the Treaty of Rapallo, which was signed in 1922. At the time, there was an international conference in Geneva in 1922 of the League of Nations. Well, there were two countries who were not members of the League of Nations, and that was Germany and the Soviet Union. Germany was still viewed badly because of World War I, and the Soviet Union was viewed with suspicion by the Western democracies because they were afraid, they were suspicious of communism. So Germany and the Soviet Union, delegates from these countries met in the Italian town of Rapallo, and they signed something called the Treaty of Rapallo. In this treaty, they secretly agreed to cooperate on military planning, and this meant that Germany could develop weapons technology inside Russia. Now, this was a way that Germany was able to get around the restrictions placed on it by the Treaty of Versailles. So this is an agreement outside the League. It has to be, because Germany and the Soviet Union are not League members. And again, it's undermining the League, as Germany can secretly get around the League restrictions. In 1925, there was what was seen at the time as a very important agreement, and this was the Locarno Agreement. This was an agreement between Britain, France and Germany. Gustav Stresemann, you can see on the right, was the leader of Germany at the time, and this was a real triumph for him. In fact, there was something called the spirit of Locarno. People really felt at the time, many people felt certainly, that this was bringing in a new age of peace, that it's going to remove the future threat of war. And this is because the western borders of Germany were finally agreed. And Britain and France and Germany agreed, look, these are the borders, we're not going to invade each other, this is it, the dispute is over. The western borders of Germany are finally agreed. It was really a hopeful spirit at the time. Germany was then allowed to join the League of Nations. Again, this was a real triumph for Gustav Stresemann. However, certain things were missing from the Locarno agreements. If you remember, there had been some parts of Germany which had been taken away in the east, and Germany was still disputing these, and there was nothing about the eastern borders of Germany in the Locarno agreement. Let's have a look at the Gustav Stresemann. He said something here, and this is very indicative. This really gives you an idea of what he thought and what the Germans, how they saw the Locarno Agreement. Let's read what he said. In my view, the foreign policy of Germany has three main objectives. First, a solution to the Rhine question. Second, protection for the 10 to 12 million Germans living under the foreign yoke. Third, the alteration of our eastern borders so that we can recover Danzig and the Polish corridor. In the more distant future, the uniting of Austria and Germany. So you can see here that the Germans and Stresemann, they are seeing the Locarno Agreement as the first stage in dismantling, in undoing the Treaty of Versailles and the restrictions it placed on the land of Germany. He's talking about regaining 10 to 12 millions living in foreign countries. He's talking about getting back Danzig and the Polish corridor, about uniting with Austria, all things forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles, but Stresemann sees Locarno as the first step towards this. Let's look at that again. So yeah, German hopes regarding the East. They're hoping they can reclaim territory in the East. In Poland and Czechoslovakia, the Polish corridor. In certain parts of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland, lots of Germans were living there, and Germany hoped to claim this territory for itself from Czechoslovakia. They saw it as a change to Versailles rather than an agreement which meant that things were settled and it was going to be, nothing was going to change in future. A real triumph, as we say though, for Stresemann, and it was very beneficial for Germany because they both joined the League of Nations and they received big American loans after this, which helped to really kickstart the German economy, these American loans. After Locarno, and after that initial period, after that first period where everyone's feeling very, very hopeful, there's this new spirit of Locarno, peace in the future, France starts to get a bit worried because the Treaty of Locarno does forbid them from invading areas of German territory, like they did previously in the Ruhr, and they start to feel a bit threatened and insecure about Germany. They start to construct something called the Maginot Line. If you look at the picture here, you can see the Maginot Line was a series of fortifications. It was a military defence line along the border with Germany, along the border of the Rhineland here. Now the French spent a lot of money on this, and here's just a diagram. You can see just how extensive and deep these fortifications were. You've got concrete gun emplacements and pillboxes and underground railways underneath the Maginot Line to bring troops back and forth. So you can clearly see here, if the French are spending this money building this massive military fortification, they certainly don't feel confident in peace. They don't feel confident the League of Nations is going to stop a future war. This is something that Clemenceau said, again, at the time. History eternally repeats itself. We have not finished with Germany. Any understanding with her is impossible. And England, whether she likes it or not, will be compelled to march with us at the moment of danger to defend herself. So in the very year of, 3 years after, 3 years after the Locarno Agreement, Clemenceau is already predicting a future war, saying that Germany will never agree to things. And so here, again, clearly doesn't feel that the Locarno Agreement has ensured future peace. This is something that was said by an American politician and statesman called Henry Kissinger. He actually won the Nobel Peace Prize as well, although some people consider him a war criminal. But anyway, he was a historian, is a historian, and this is what he said. The League of Nations' commitment to collective security was devalued by Locarno. For if collective security was in fact reliable, Locarno was unnecessary. If Locarno was necessary, the League of Nations was unreliable, inadequate to ensure the security of even its principal founding members. Henry Kissinger is making that point. Look, if they believed, and France and Britain were two of the main founding members of the League of Nations, if they believed that collective security and the League of Nations could ensure peace, why were they making the Locarno Agreement outside the League of Nations? Another agreement was the Kellog-Briand Pack. That's Monsieur Briand, the gentleman with the moustache in the picture there. This was made in 1928. And here is where 15 major countries around the world, they agreed never again to go to war. Now that sounds brilliant. That sounds, fantastic. What a great hope for future world peace. 15 big countries around the world have said, look, we are never again going to use war as foreign policy. We're never going to use military action, war, invasion. Small problem with the Kellogg-Briand Pack, though. There were no obligations. It was just a piece of paper. There was nothing to stop any country in the treaty, no punishments, no sanctions, if they went outside this Kellogg-Briand Pact. And again, it's another agreement outside the League of Nations. Japan and Italy, both of whom signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact, they also, as you will see soon, they went and they undertook military invasions. So the Kellog-Briand Pact really was an agreement that was just a piece of paper. It had no force to back it up. Let's have a little summary then. So 1922 was the Washington Naval Agreement, where Britain and the USA and Japan agreed to limit the size of their navies. In 1922, the Rapallo Treaty between Germany and the Soviet Union, where Germany secretly managed to develop weapons within the Soviet Union. Again, this is against the Treaty of Versailles. In 1925, the Locarno Agreement, seen at the time by many as a real hope for future world peace. The western borders of Germany are agreed, but in Germany it's seen as changing the Treaty of Versailles, and they have hopes for further expansion of German territory, overturning the Treaty of Versailles. And in 1928, the Kellog-Briand Pact, where 15 countries meet and say, we are never again going to use war. Small problem, no force to back it up. So, in your opinion, do you think these treaties made the world a safer place?